My name is Nora Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and 11 days before Thanksgiving, my mother mailed 31 invitations to our family, handwritten, one for every household. And mine was the only name she left off the list inside. She didn't call to explain. She didn't send one of those long emails that starts with, "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship." She didn't do anything at all, which I have come to understand was the entire point. Let me tell you what the invitation looked like, because the details matter more than you'd think. It was heavy cream cardstock, my mother's handwriting, the slanted kind they taught her in a Ballard County schoolhouse in 1971. This was going to be the first Thanksgiving since my grandmother died in March. So my mother had made it a memorial dinner. 3 generations. The fellowship hall at First Methodist, the good tablecloths, the whole thing. Inside the card, there was a printed guest list and a seating chart, because 17 people is too many for anybody to sort out on their own. 31 envelopes, 31 addresses in her own hand. 17 names on the list. Mine was not one of them. Not an oversight. Not a printing error. 17 names for a family of 18. And the one she left out was the one whose signature she needed. I want to be honest with you about how I found out. Nobody told me. I didn't get a phone call. I didn't get a text. I didn't hear it secondhand from a cousin. I found out on a Monday evening at 6:40, when my grandfather called me from a 2-bedroom house on Bellamy Street that he had not chosen to live in. He is 87 years old. He worked on engines for 41 years. And he still keeps a pencil in his shirt pocket and a folded rag in his back pocket. "Nora Jean," he said, "I've got this list in front of me and I've read it 4 times. Why isn't your name on it?" I didn't answer him. I sat down on my kitchen floor in Atlanta with the phone against my ear and I didn't say one word. And after a while he said my name again, softer, the way you'd say it to somebody standing at the edge of something. That question is the reason this story exists. Hold on to it. I'll come back to it, and I'll come back to it properly, but not yet, because before any of it makes sense, you need to know about a Tuesday morning in June of 2019, when my grandmother got in her Buick by herself and drove 22 minutes into town and walked up a flight of wooden stairs to a lawyer's office on Main Street. She was 78. She told nobody, not her husband of 59 years, not either of her children, not me. 4 months later, she had a stroke. I need you to hold on to that number too. 4 months? An attorney in a gray suit is going to say it out loud in a room full of my relatives. And when he does, everything I thought I understood about my own family is going to turn over like a page. Here's what I can tell you now. My mother spent 8 months believing she owned something. She was wrong about that, and she had been wrong about it for 6 years. And the reason she was wrong is that a woman who never finished high school sat down across from an attorney in the summer of 2019 and quietly outthought every person in her family, including me. If you have ever been the person a family quietly agreed to stop counting, the one whose absence got easier for everybody the longer it went on, stay with me. I think you already know how this feels. I'd rather tell it to you than to anybody else. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened when an 87-year-old man decided a list with 17 names on it was wrong, and picked up a pen and fixed it. One more thing before I start. I'm going to tell you this the way it happened, beginning to end, in order, the way you'd walk a fence line. I'm not going to jump you back and forth across 20 years and make you keep track of where you are. You'll know exactly where we are the whole time. We start in the summer of 2004, on a porch in the middle of a heat wave, with a coffee can full of nails. The summer of 2004. I was 12. The porch boards on the east side of 41 Quarry Road had gone soft, and my grandfather decided he was going to replace them himself, which is what he decided about everything. It took 3 Saturdays. It was 94 degrees every one of them, and the cicadas in the pecan trees were so loud you had to raise your voice to be heard 4 feet away. My job was the nails. Hein gave me a Maxwell House coffee can with about 2 pounds of 8-penny nails in it, and my whole assignment was to hand him one at a time when he put his hand out, not the can, one nail. He never once looked up to take it. I have thought about those 3 Saturdays more than any 3 days of my life. "A house talks," he said, somewhere in the second one. "It'll tell you what it needs a long time before it breaks. If you're the kind of person who listens, how do you listen to a house?" He set a nail, tapped it twice, drove it in 3 strokes. "You come back to it," tap. "That's the whole trick. People think it's tools. It's not tools," tap. "You come back." Around 2 o'clock, my grandmother would come out with sweet tea in a glass pitcher she'd had since before my mother was born, the kind with the ridges down the side. She made it the way her mother made it, sugar in while the water was still hot, and she'd stand there with one hand on the porch rail and look out at the yard like she was checking on it. That house came to her from her daddy in 1979. It was hers before she was anybody's grandmother, before it was anybody's Thanksgiving, before any of the rest of this, and I want you to notice something, because I didn't notice it until I was 34. In 59 years of marriage, I never one time heard her call that house ours. She called it mine. She said it the same way she said her own name, not proud about it, not guarding it, just accurate. Inside, in the doorway of the pantry, there were 4 columns of pencil marks: Marissa, Tessa, Owen, me. She measured us every year on the 4th of July, before the ice cream, with the same carpenter's pencil and a paint stirrer laid flat across the top of our heads, 4 columns, going up the door frame like a bar chart of a family. My column stops at 15. That's the year I got taller than she was, and she said, "Well, that's the end of that," and put the pencil back in the drawer. And I remember being sad about it, in a way I couldn't have explained to anybody. She never sanded them off. Not when she repainted that kitchen in 2006. Not when she repainted it again in 2014. My mother offered to, twice. June of 2012. 8 years later, I was 20 years old, home from school for the summer, and I woke up early on a Saturday because the window unit in my old bedroom had quit sometime in the night. It was 6:15 in the morning. My mother was already at the kitchen table. She had a property survey spread out in front of her, the whole plat. All 2.3 acres, the house and the barn, and the line where the lot meets Sowell Creek. Next to it was a yellow legal pad with numbers written down the side, and a cup of coffee she had let go cold, which meant she had been sitting there a long while. "What's that?" "Just planning." "Planning what?" She folded the survey before she answered me. That's how I knew whatever came next wasn't going to be true. "Go wake your sister." I went down the hall to wake Marissa. Marissa was already awake. Marissa was dressed. And the coffee in that pot had been made by somebody. And it hadn't been me. I was 20 years old, and I stood in that hallway and I understood, in a way I did not have the words for, that there was a conversation happening in my family that I was not in. I didn't say anything about it. Not that morning, not that summer, not for 13 years. Quiet people notice. We just don't say it out loud. And everybody around us makes the same mistake about what that means. They think we don't know. A Tuesday morning in June of 2019. My grandmother was 78 years old. She got up, made breakfast for my grandfather, and told him she needed to run into town. Then she got into her Buick by herself and drove 22 minutes into Renfield, and she parked on Main Street, and she walked up a flight of wooden stairs to the second floor of a building with a dentist's office on one side and a lawyer's office on the other. She was in there a little under an hour. On the way home, she stopped at the Piggly Wiggly and bought buttermilk. That is the only reason anybody remembers the day at all, because she came home with buttermilk, and my grandfather asked what she'd gone to town for, and she said, "Buttermilk," and that was the end of it. She told no one, not her husband of 59 years, not my mother, not my uncle, not me. I'm not going to tell you yet what she did in that office. I want you to sit where I sat, which is on the other side of 6 years of not knowing. October, 4 months later, she was standing at the kitchen counter, and she went down. My grandfather found her. She lived almost 6 more years, but she came out of it changed, not gone, changed. Her right hand never came all the way back, and her memory started keeping strange hours, so that she could tell you the name of every girl in her 1962 graduating class, but not what she'd had for lunch. 4 months. I need you to hold that number, because it is going to do more work in this story than any lawyer, any document, or anything I ever said out loud. Here's where I have to be fair to my mother, and I'm going to be, because this story does not work if you think she was a monster from the beginning. She wasn't. She was the one who showed up. For 18 months, my mother drove her to physical therapy twice a week. She filled the 7-day pill organizer every Sunday night. She had grab bars put in the shower and a rail put on the back steps. When my grandmother ran a fever in the winter of 2020, my mother slept on that couch for 9 nights. I was 90 minutes away in Atlanta, and I came on weekends. And I want to be honest, I came on weekends. My mother was there on Tuesdays. In January of 2020, my grandmother signed a power of attorney naming my mother as her agent. Every one of us agreed it was the right thing. It was the right thing. And there were bills. I didn't know how many. Nobody in that family ever said a number out loud about money. Not once. In my entire life. That turned out to be the most expensive habit any of us had. And I'll tell you exactly what it cost when I get there. Now, I promised you I'd keep this in order, so I'm going to be straight with you. The next thing I want to tell you happened after my grandmother died. I'm putting it here anyway, because it belongs to this part of the story and not to that one. You'll understand why in about 40 seconds. 6 weeks after we buried her, my mother told my grandfather that 41 Quarry Road was too much house for a man his age. That was the whole argument. It took 6 weeks. Haim moved into a 2-bedroom rental on Bellamy Street, 3 miles away. He packed his own tools. He wrapped every wooden handle in a rag with linseed oil on it, the way his daddy taught him in 1948, and he loaded them into the truck himself. And he moved into a house with no porch on it. People ask me why my grandfather didn't just keep that house. He could have. In Georgia, there's a thing called years support, where a widower can petition the probate court, and depending on what the court allows, it can come ahead of almost everything else in an estate. Mr. Dunlap explained it to him twice, sat him down and walked him through it twice. Pop said no both times. I'm going to tell you exactly why he said no, but not here. He didn't tell me until the very end of all this, standing in a lawyer's office with his hat in his hand. And when he finally said it, it rearranged everything I thought I knew about him. March of 2025. She died at home, in the bedroom with the east window, on a Thursday morning while it was still gray outside. She was 84. My grandfather was in the chair beside the bed, where he had been since Tuesday, and he did not get up when the hospice nurse came in. 59 years. We buried her in the cemetery behind First Methodist, 6 rows back, next to her mother and her daddy, in the same red clay her family had been putting people into since 1911. For 9 days, the neighbors brought food: 3 platters of fried chicken, 7 cakes, 2 hams. A woman I did not recognize left a pan of squash casserole on the porch with masking tape on the lid that said, "No need to return dish." Not one of us could eat any of it. That is the part nobody warns you about. That a Southern funeral produces more food than a family in grief can physically consume. And it sits there going bad while everybody keeps saying how good everyone has been. April, 5 weeks later, Mr. Dunlap called us in for the estate administration meeting. Not a reading of the will. That's a movie thing, and I want to be accurate with you. It's a meeting, in an office, with a legal pad. His office was on the 2nd floor of that building on Main Street. Same wooden stairs my grandmother walked up in June of 2019. They creak on the 4th one and the 9th one. There was a window air conditioner running so hard you had to lean in to hear anybody. 8 of us in that room: my grandfather, my mother, my sister Marissa, my uncle Raymond and his wife, my cousins Tessa and Owen, me, Mr. Dunlap went through the will first. My mother was named executor. That is not a small thing, and I want you to hold on to it. An executor is not just the person in charge. She is a fiduciary, which means she is legally obligated to act in the interest of everybody named in that estate, including the ones who aren't in the room, including the ones who are. Everything else was about what we expected. Then he set the will down, squared the pages on the desk, and took a second folder out of his drawer, blue. "Before we go any further," he said, "I need to tell you about a trust. The Opal Mercer Family Trust, executed June the 11th, 2019, 4 months before her stroke. My grandmother had put the house into it. Mr. Dunlap was named trustee, not my mother, not my uncle, an independent third party. My mother and my uncle Raymond were given the use of that house for the rest of their lives, and the 4 grandchildren, Marissa, Tessa, Owen, and me, were named remainder beneficiaries. Then Mr. Dunlap said the sentence, and he said it in the flat way a man says something he has been dreading saying in front of 8 people. The trustee could not sell that house without the written, notarized consent of all 4 of us. All 4. My mother did not own that house. She had never owned that house. What she had was permission to be in it. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. But her left hand closed on the arm of that chair, slowly, the way you shut a door when you don't want anybody to hear it shut. My uncle Raymond looked at the floor. He looked at the floor a long while. And I remember thinking that was strange, because he had just been handed something. Somebody asked how none of us had known. Mr. Dunlap explained it in about 15 seconds. And it is the simplest thing in this entire story. A will goes through probate court. Probate court is public record. Anybody can walk in and ask. A trust doesn't go through probate at all. That is not a loophole. That is what a trust is for. My grandmother had put that house somewhere her own daughter could not see it. And she had done it on a Tuesday in June, alone, in a Buick, with buttermilk in the back seat, 4 months before anybody on earth could stand up in a courtroom and argue she hadn't been in her right mind when she did it. She had beaten that argument before anyone thought to make it. On the drive back to Atlanta that afternoon, I thought my grandmother had been protecting the house. It took me 8 more months to understand she had been protecting me. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something, because I think a lot of you already know the answer. Has anybody in your family ever handled something on your behalf? Signed something, arranged something, decided something, and then told you about it afterward, in a tone that made it sound like they had done you a favor? Tell me in the comments. I'm serious. I'd like to know how many of us there are. Now, what I did next. I want to be clear that I am not a detective, and I did not do anything clever. I do compliance work for a company in Atlanta. My entire job is reading documents that other people would rather I skim. So I did the only thing I know how to do, which is start a folder. Between April and July, I found 4 things. Item 1. My mother contacted a real estate agent 9 days before the funeral. I know that because 6 months later, she forwarded me an unrelated email chain and did not scroll down far enough before she hit send. That is the whole reason I know anything. She got in a hurry one afternoon in October, 9 days before we buried her mother. Item 2. There was already a buyer. Coldbrook Property Group, out of Gainesville. They came in at $585,000. My mother countered at $649. They settled at $618,000 and put it under contract. Item 3 is the one that still gets me, and it took me one afternoon and no money at all to find. In Georgia, every deed is filed with the clerk of Superior Court in the county where the land sits, and you can look it up online for free. Anybody can. You do not need a lawyer, and you do not need permission. Coldbrook had bought 2 adjoining parcels in April of 2024, 11 months before my grandmother died. Somebody had been having conversations with that company while she was still alive, still sitting on that porch, still asking my grandfather to bring her the good scissors so she could cut back the hydrangeas. I have never found out who picked up the phone first, and at some point I decided I did not want to. Item 4. My mother needed 4 signatures, and she went and got 3 of them. She drove 2.5 hours to Chattanooga to see Tessa, and she brought a notary with her. Owen signed his in a bank branch in Savannah on his lunch hour. Both of them were told it was estate paperwork. The phrase she used was closing out your grandmother's affairs. Neither one of them read it. 11 pages, and they were both at work. And I am not going to pretend I would have done better. And then there is the item I never gave a number to. She did not call me, not one time, not in April, not in May, not in June, not in July, 8 months. And my mother never picked up the phone. My silence could be manufactured, as long as nobody ever offered me the chance to break it. People ask why I didn't call her in July and have it out. I have thought about that more than anything else in this story. The honest answer is I was not sure yet whether I was looking at a crime or at a woman I had misjudged. And there is something that happens when you grow up quiet in a loud family. You learn that being right is not the same as being believed. I wanted that folder thick enough that nobody could talk me out of it. In July, I called Mr. Dunlap and asked him one question. Could that sale close? It could not. Georgia requires an attorney to handle a real estate closing, and that attorney had run a title examination and found the restrictions sitting right there in the trust. The title company had issued what they call an exception, which in plain English means nobody insures this until all 4 of those people sign in front of a notary. 3 of 4 is not 4. Then Mr. Dunlap told me the part I had not thought to ask about. Contracts have deadlines. Coldbrook's ran to the 15th of January. If my mother did not have my signature by then, the buyer walked, the contract died, and the house stayed where my grandmother put it. I hung up the phone and sat in my car in a parking deck on Peachtree and did the arithmetic. 24 weeks, the last Wednesday in August, 20 weeks on the clock. Tessa called me at 9 at night, and we stayed on the phone 47 minutes. She hadn't called about the house. She called because of a look on her father's face. I asked Daddy straight out, she said. I said, Daddy, what's happening with Nana's house? And he said, your aunt's handling it. That was the whole answer. 4 words. She stopped. And Nora, he wouldn't look at me. He looked at the television. The television wasn't even on. I want to say something about my Uncle Raymond, because I have had a year to think about him, and I have landed somewhere I did not expect. Raymond is not a cruel man. I have never once seen him be cruel. What Raymond figured out, somewhere in his 60s, is that not knowing a thing is cheaper than knowing it. If he never asked the question, he never had to answer it, and he could go on being a man who had done nothing wrong. I was going to get half of whatever son came out of that house. He knew that much. He decided that was all he needed to know. There is a kind of person who takes something from you, and there is a kind of person who holds the door and looks at the floor while somebody else does. I used to think those were very different. I don't anymore. Then, about 30 minutes in, Tessa told me something she had not told a single person. I put in for a transfer in June, she said. The regional office in Renfield. A pause. I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want to jinx it. Tessa, I know. I could hear her breathing. I was going to ask if I could stay at the house while I looked for a place of my own. 6 months, maybe, just till spring. I was working up to asking your mama at Thanksgiving. I sat with that for a second. My cousin had been rehearsing how to ask permission to live in a house that had been under contract since April, and she was one of the 3 signatures my mother had already collected, in a kitchen in Chattanooga, with a notary sitting at the table. She wasn't fighting for a memory. Nobody in this story was fighting for a memory. She had a moving date in her head. Before we hung up, she asked the question that turned all of it. If you never signed anything, how is any of this still going? I didn't have an answer, so I called Mr. Dunlap the next morning, and I asked him whether anything had come into the trust file that I hadn't seen. He was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then he said he would call me back. He called me back on the 11th of September at 4:20 in the afternoon. Nora, he said, there's a document in this file I need you to come look at. Your mother filed it 2 weeks ago. It was an affidavit of diligent search. She had gone to a notary's office on Peachtree Industrial on a Thursday afternoon, and she had signed a sworn statement. And in that sworn statement, she said that the beneficiary, Nora Mercer, was estranged from the family, had withdrawn from family affairs, and could not be located despite good faith effort. Could not be located. There was a notary seal on it, and a date, and a journal entry number. Every notarized signature in this country leaves a receipt somewhere, in somebody's logbook, whether you go looking for it or not. I had spent 8 months not keeping receipts. My mother had just handed me one with her own name on it. I live 90 minutes from my mother's house. She has had my number in her phone for 11 years, saved under Nora Cell. My address is on her Christmas card list, or it was, right up until the year she stopped sending me one. That was not a family argument anymore. In Georgia, swearing falsely in a written statement made under oath is a felony, not a technicality, not paperwork, a felony, with a number attached to it and a range of years beside it. I did not know that in August. I knew it by the 2nd week of September, sitting in a parking lot in Renfield with a photocopy on the seat beside me, understanding for the first time that my mother had not simply forgotten to include me. She had put it in writing that I did not exist. 16 weeks left, 7 weeks on the clock, Monday evening, 6:40. That call I told you about at the very beginning. This is where it happens. Nora Jean, why isn't your name on it? I told him, all of it, in order, the way I have told you. It took 20 minutes, and he did not interrupt me one time. When I finished, my grandfather was quiet so long, I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. 8 months, he said. You've been carrying this 8 months by yourself. Yes, sir. Has it closed? Has anything been signed over? No, sir. It can't. Not without me. I was quiet again. I could hear a clock in that rental house on Bellamy Street, the kind that ticks. I'll see you Thursday, he said. Not at your mama's table, at mine. Tuesday morning, a courier came to my office. Not my apartment, my office, where the receptionist signed for it and walked it back to my desk and set it down with a look I had to pretend I didn't see. Inside was a consent form with 2 yellow tabs on it, a prepaid return envelope, and a note on a folded half-sheet. Nora, Mr. Dunlap needs this by Friday to close out your grandmother's estate. Sign where marked. We can talk about Thanksgiving after. Mom. 2 things about that note. The first is that it was the only piece of mail my mother had sent me in 8 months. The second is how she signed it. Mom. She had not signed anything to me, Mom, since I was in college. For 11 years, it had been Sylvia, typed at the bottom of forwarded emails about car insurance, renewals, and somebody's obituary in the county paper. She knew exactly which word to reach for. That is the part I keep coming back to. She had it in a drawer somewhere, and she took it out on a Tuesday because she needed something from me. I want to tell you what that form actually said, because it did not say sell. Nowhere on either page did the word sell appear. It said consent to the trustee's administration and disposition of trust property. Tessa signed that same sentence at a kitchen table in Chattanooga and believed she was closing an account. I want to tell you, I threw it away. I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table that night with a pen in my hand, and I went through that form 4 times. And somewhere in the 3rd pass, I understood something I am not proud of. Signing it would be easier, not easier than the alternative. Easier than everything that was going to happen to me if I didn't. There was a whole version of the next 30 years sitting on that page. In that version, I get invited to things. My phone rings on my birthday. Somebody saves me a seat at a table without being asked. And I never again stand in a hallway at 6:15 in the morning, knowing there is a conversation going on that I am not in. The price of that version was 1 signature, on 1 page, of a document I was not supposed to have gone through that carefully. If you have ever been offered your family back at a price, you already know what that hour felt like. I sat there until 11:40 at night. Then I put the pen down, not because I was brave. I want to be honest with you about that. Because people tell these stories like they knew the whole time what they were doing. And I didn't. I was 34 years old, and I wanted my mother to want me at her table. I put it down because I kept thinking about a coffee can full of nails on a porch rail. And about a 78-year-old woman who got into a Buick by herself on a Tuesday in June and drove 22 minutes into town and climbed a flight of wooden stairs and told not one living soul 4 months before her stroke because she had already worked out what her own daughter was going to do, and she had decided to stop her without ever once accusing her out loud. She did the hard thing when nobody was watching. The least I could do was not undo it. I put the form back in its envelope. I did not send it. And I did not call my mother. And I did not write the long email I composed twice in my head and deleted both times. I went to bed. Thursday was in 2 days. Wednesday morning, my mother called me. It was not an apology. I want to be precise about that, because I have watched people mistake one for the other their whole lives. I may have moved too fast on the invitations. Okay. There's a place for you at that table, Nora. There always was. I'm eating with Pop. 4 seconds. I counted them. He doesn't have room. He's got room. Nora, a little sharper, I think you're making this bigger than it is. Mama, I need you to know I haven't signed anything. I hung up before she could answer. It is the only rude thing I did in this entire story, and I have never once been sorry about it. Thursday, I drove 90 minutes north with a chess pie on the passenger floorboard. My grandfather's rental on Bellamy Street has a kitchen you cannot turn around in. It smells like coffee and linseed oil, and it has no porch, and I have never in my life been so glad to walk into a house. I had bought the smallest turkey the Kroger in Renfield sells. There was cornbread dressing made from my grandmother's recipe, in her handwriting. On a card so old the corners had gone soft, butter beans. Deviled eggs Tessa brought, on the deviled egg plate, because there is always a deviled egg plate. He made the sweet tea in her glass pitcher, and he put the sugar in while the water was still hot, the way she did. Tessa drove 2.5 hours from Chattanooga. Owen couldn't get away. He had a shift Friday morning in Savannah. He left a voicemail instead, and my grandfather set his phone on the counter and played it for all of us while we ate. It was 90 seconds long. He said he was thinking about Nana. He said he was sorry about the dressing. He'd have made his mama's. He said he loved us and to eat some for him. Nobody said one word about that house. Not one. We talked about the weather, which had turned that week. We talked about deer season. We talked about a neighbor's dog that had learned to open a gate. 4 miles away, in the fellowship hall at First Methodist, 17 people were sitting down under a printed seating chart. There were 4 places set at my grandfather's table. Her blue-flowered china, the good dishes, the ones that came out for Easter, and never once for a Tuesday. 4 plates, 4 sets of her silver. And in the middle of the table, propped against the sugar bowl, there was a photograph I had never seen in my life. It was 41 Quarry Road, taken from behind, from out toward the creek. You could see the whole back of the house, and the barn, and the line of water at the edge of the frame. Somebody had stood in that field on an ordinary day and taken a picture of the back of a house. Pop found it in a shoebox when he packed, on the back, in her handwriting, back of the house, April, no year. She didn't write the year. There were 4 plates and 3 of us in that room. He set the 4th one anyway, and when he played that voicemail, he laid the phone down on it. And nobody said a word about that. And nobody needed to. After we ate, he took the invitation out of his coat pocket. It had been in that pocket 6 days. He opened it and went down the list out loud. All 17 names, slowly, one at a time, the way he used to go down the ingredients on the side of a paint can. When he got to the end, he set it on the table and said, "That's a good list. Those are good people." Then he took the pencil out of his shirt pocket and wrote one word at the bottom of it. He wrote, Nora. He folded it and put it back in his coat. "There," he said. "Now it's right." Later I found him on the back steps with his coffee. "Your mama put your grandmother's medical bills on her own credit," he said. 11 months of them, $61,000. She never told a soul. I found the statements in February. I didn't say anything. I'm not telling you that so you'll forgive her. I'm telling you so you'll understand what she did with it. What did she do with it? He turned his cup around on his knee. She decided it made her the owner of something. The Friday after Thanksgiving, my grandfather and I went to see Mr. Dunlap. Pop wore his coat. He had that invitation in the pocket of it, the way he had for a week. Mr. Dunlap went through the affidavit out loud, so all three of us heard the same words at the same time. Estranged, withdrawn from family affairs, could not be located despite good faith effort. Then he took his glasses off and asked me whether I had anything at all that spoke to the question of whether I had been, in his words, reachable. My grandfather stood up, took the invitation out of his coat, and laid it on the desk. 31 households, 17 names in my mother's handwriting, the slanted kind they taught her in 1971. A postmark from 3 weeks before she stood in a notary's office and swore she could not find me. And at the bottom of it, in carpenter's pencil, in an 87-year-old man's hand, one more name. Mr. Dunlap looked at that card for a long time. She addressed 31 envelopes by hand, he said. Yes, sir. And she remembered 31 addresses. Yes, sir. He set it down very carefully. The way you set a thing down once it has stopped being a piece of paper and become evidence. The thing my mother made to erase me was the thing that proved I was there. On the way out, I asked him the question I had been carrying since April. You could have taken the whole house, I said. Mr. Dunlap told you twice. I know it. Why didn't you? He stood on the sidewalk on Main Street with his hat in his hands and looked up the street a while. Because I didn't want to own it, he said. I wanted to be welcome in it. Those are not the same thing, and I was too old to keep pretending they were. January the 15th, Coldbrook Property Group withdrew. No fourth signature, no title insurance, no sale. The contract died on a Thursday, and nobody called to tell me. 11 days later, my sister texted me. Not called, texted. I didn't know she told them you were unreachable. That was the whole message. I went through it 4 times, looking for the part where she said she was sorry, or asked how I was, or explained what she had known since the summer I was 20. There wasn't one. There was a sentence that made her innocent of exactly one thing. I typed 3 replies. I sent none of them. Some doors you leave unlocked instead of open. In February, Mr. Dunlap petitioned the probate court to remove my mother as executor. I did not say one word at that hearing. I did not have to. People ask me whether I turned her in. I didn't. Not because I forgave her. I want to be honest. I haven't, not the way people mean it. I didn't do it because my grandfather is 87, and I was not going to let the last thing he watched be his daughter in a courtroom. In March, Tessa's transfer came through. She moves into 41 Quarry Road on the 1st of June. The 3 of us drove up to check the house before spring. The gutters, the seams on that tin roof, the porch boards on the east side that Pop and I replaced when I was 12. Owen stood in the pantry doorway a long while, looking at 4 columns of pencil marks. Then he took a pencil out of his coat and made a new one. Not for himself. He wrote the date, and under it, 2 words. Still here, if you have ever been the one they counted on to stay quiet. I want you to hear this part. I don't have advice. I have one sentence. If somebody in your family needs your signature, and they have stopped calling you, those are not 2 facts. That is one fact. My grandmother did not leave me a house. She left me a room I could not be removed from, and she did it 4 months before anybody thought she needed to. So, tell me down in the comments, has anyone ever quietly taken your name off a list you had every right to be on? What did you do? I read every one of these, and somebody down there has lived your version of it. Subscribe if this one found you tonight. The coffee can is still on the porch rail. I checked in March. Some things stay where they are because somebody decided they should.